What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Cervantes Podcast. Joining me today to discuss the importance of Black educators, the disparities between the lack of educational resources between Black students and their white counterparts, his book series, A Crunchy Life, and what essentially inspired him to become a teacher is author, educator, and motivational speaker, Mr. Glen Mourning. How are you doing today, Mr. Mourning?
I'm doing well, sir. How about yourself, man?
I'm good. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course.
For you, what initially made you want to become an educator? Was there a teacher you were inspired by or a subject in school that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, I mean, I get this question a lot, especially as it relates to just, you know, having played football in college and being surrounded by guys who were more so gravitated towards jobs in the financial industries. But for me, growing up, I think the only saving grace that was pretty tangible were teachers and my mentor. So growing up in the way that I did, in subsidized housing, pretty much just growing up in like the projects. You don't necessarily have too many positive role models, especially men.
Right.
And being a young Black kid growing up in the early 90s, um, it was kind of like where the hip hop scene had started to kind of mature into a bit more of a mainstream dynamic. So that was kind of like all I saw, right? And I had I had a teacher, a white woman named Dr. Inarako, who just essentially said like, you could go down the road that your uncles and some of your friends in the neighborhood are going down, or you have all these like, these aspirations of wanting to play basketball, want to play football, but you may not know that that also requires an academic commitment. So, if it wasn't for her and a couple other teachers, I don't think I would have had any success in terms of being a professional. Um, I mean, not a professional ball player, a professional as in having a career. So I kind of just always wanted to be like them, right? I always wanted to be able to encourage and inspire, kids that didn't necessarily see the other side of the coin, which is why when I started teaching, I went immediately into, urban education is, a term that's being used widespread, but to work with Black and brown children, because I just know that there's a different struggle there. Um, and, that's a pretty deep point in itself. But yeah, mainly because of other teachers, you know what I mean, which was the biggest motivation for me wanting to then become one.
No, yeah, that's inspiring, and I totally understand that because I think for me when I was younger, I wasn't athletic, so and I didn't play video games, so for me it was reading and like learning and like reading for fun, but also like when we had to read when we had to read a book in school, like I was excited to do that, and I remember growing up, it was kind of like I remember going to the barber shop and like always having a book in my hand, and like my dad's friends and like the barbers would always be like, oh, why are you reading? Like you should be like on your phone or watching TV. But like, I just love to read so much. And but in school, like amongst my peers, it wasn't really looked at as cool. It's kind of like nerdy, like that kind of thing. And once social media came out, I kind of I kind of moved away from that and like put the books down and started going on my phone all the time. But to make a long story short, I think no, yeah, I want to read more again. And I have a whole bunch. I got the Obama memoir and like a lot of books that I want to read because I think reading is fundamental. And I think it's the same way how we watch TV to escape from the world. That's how I look at reading, and I think it also develop like kids, like, developing their vocabulary and being able to transport yourself from like this world to a fictional world, or even learning about your history. I think it's important for Black and Latino kids um to realize that and then like do that, like reading and like just because well, we'll get to it later, but I think sometimes the media like kind of looks at it as like, oh, like that's for white people, that's for white kids. But like no, that's global. Like everyone should be reading. Everyone should be educating themselves. So that's very inspiring because I'm sure because that um propelled you into where you are today, like being an educator and like inspiring young kids. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, to this day, I'm not an avid reader. Um, I think more so for me, it's more so about understanding my role and my place in the larger global context of the world, right? You know, a lot of people use the phrase and use the approach of, you know, reading is an opportunity for you to escape, you know, and it's a way for you to, I guess, be better informed on certain issues or topics. But for me, as an adult now, I look at it more so in like it gives you the tools to make, you know, better informed decisions about yourself. You know, how do you want to present yourself as a Black male? Do you want to, you know, reiterate a stereotype that is widespread, or do you want to your point, walk into a barbershop, probably in an urban community with a book in your hand and be the only kid in there with one, right? So,
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of layers to it. But I do think at the end of the day, as long as you are enjoying what you are kind of ingesting or, you know, providing yourself with in terms of the information or the content, one thing that a lot of people do is, especially I've seen this in schools across the country, and we might have a chance to talk about it a little more, but a lot of times people make reading a punishment in, you know, in Black communities, to the point where it's like it becomes a turnoff, right? It no longer becomes a privilege to have really awesome books in front of you, but more so like, you know, it becomes a chore, it becomes a task, it becomes something that you are trying to avoid at all costs, you know? So I think we need to do a better job as educators in Black set, you know, in urban environments, or where, however you want to phrase it, at making sure that the way that we introduce our kids to books, that we do it in a better way.
Right. Like it's okay. Yeah, I agree with that. It's okay not to be a stereotype. It's okay for a Black man to read, or Black people to read, and to have some self-reflection and have some self-discipline. And you don't have to we always say, like, Black people are not monolithic, so it's okay to you know, be different than do something different than what everyone else is doing. That's what we should, like,
Well,
really
it's not different from what everyone else is doing, because our people do read, right? It's different from what people think we do.
okay. Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, I think
Yeah.
that's when you look at the nuance of it all, I think that there's an expectation, you know, that is mainstream media's portray of what you know, a 20 to 30 to 40-year-old Black man in society, you know, should, you know, how they should spend their time, or how they do spend their time. But then there's the reality, right? Um, you know, I even use, like, for example, Fresh Prince, the TV show, that, you know, that was out back in the day, as an example, right? You have Carlton, but then you have Will, two extremes, but at the same time, at the core, to me, if you really analyze the show, they're actually the same person, right? They both want to fit in, they both want acceptance, they both love their family, but at the same time, how they express themselves is really the only difference. So Will is like, you know, outgoing, confident, you know, silly, into hip hop. And then Carlton,
Right.
same thing, outgoing. He's got his goofy side. He's confident in his ways, but they're just two different. There's parallels to it, right? Carlton pursues the academic piece. Will pursues the social, you know, the social scene a bit more.
Like
But
two
they're
sides
both,
of the same coin.
yeah, and they're both Black. You know what I mean? They're both very Black. They're both very cultured. They're both very, you know, accepted in our spaces now. You know what I mean? But we just need to be more open-minded, man, and not be so, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost just like almost afraid to embrace it, you know, because, like, to your point, I'm sure, you know, we'll have a chance to come back to it as well. But you know, when you talk like Carlton, people say you talk like a what?
A white person.
Exactly. But we have the Harry Belafontes, we have the the Morgan Freemans of the world. They're not acting like white men. They're acting like themselves, but it's just not the status quo.
Right. It's not the perception that the media often portrays, you know,
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
it's TV and film, or it's just the news and like what they choose to report on and how they report on it. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
very true.
in what we choose to believe is reality, right? You have a poster of Tupac Shakur behind you, and to most people who don't really know his story, you would assume that he was a gangster, he was a this, he was a that. But at the same time, he was a thespian, right? He was a scholar. He was
Yes.
someone very well read, educated, caring, loving, emotionally connected to to supporting women, although you know guys say and do all types of things, but at his core, but yeah, that's just how I see it, and I'm sure there are multiple perspectives and point of views, but that's just a personal take on the whole, how are we allowed to express ourselves in the academic space, socially, as it relates to academics, reading, and just being men of color.
Ask you next, what subject or subjects do you teach at your school?
So jokingly, I teach life, right? My content, I'm a language arts teacher, which is also half of my role is also dedicated to social studies. So it's kind of like a humanities role, right? Where I don't have to teach math and science at all, because in my building and in my roles in over the last 12, 13 years or so, I've been departmentalized. So I haven't taught math in the elementary setting aside from like student teaching, perhaps, right? But yeah, so anywhere from foundational skills of teaching children how to read. I used to be a first grade reading teacher, but now since then I've worked with upper elementary kids. Um, but yeah, language arts and social studies is where I am. And of course, I put my own spin on things, so it could get kind of real in my class.
Would you ever become a principal or take on an administrative role so that one day you could come up with a curriculum for your school?
I mean, I thought about going into admin, but my heart is in the nonprofit world.
Okay.
We actually have gotten a nonprofit off the ground, and we do a lot of work in the community as opposed to trying to change one individual school. Providing access to kids regardless of what school you go to in terms of financial literacy or homework help or things like that. Teaching parents how to better work with their kindergarten and first grade babies at home. I'm more so into that in the last maybe 3 years or so. Um, but I also don't think that principals, depending on where you are, really have that type of autonomy to begin with. I've been an acting principal.
Oh wow, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, my whole network of friends and close relatives, a handful of them are, principals and superintendents across up and down the East Coast. And to really create that type of change, it's really at the policy level, and it has
Okay.
little to do with the stakeholders in the building, but more so with people that sometimes have never even taught in their life, which again is another one of those problems that you face, in our education system, where people making the decisions for us classroom teachers really don't know what it's like to even be in front of a group of 20, 25 kids, um, but to your point, man, like I teach whatever I want. I take risks because I know how important it is. I know how dangerous it is not to. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it more so relates to, I would say, race and
Right.
um, African American history in the United States. Not teaching like ancient African history. I'm talking about like. So I'll give you a quick example. And you talked about curriculum, so I'm gonna just hit you with this. when I was in high school, we learned about the Roaring Twenties. Are you familiar
Yes,
with the Roaring Twenties?
yes, I am.
What was the Roaring Twenties all about? If you could just entertain me for a second.
What comes to mind right away is like the flapper girls, the women dancing, and I believe her name was oh, she was a light skinned black woman, and she was very popular in the Harlem Renaissance, and Langston Hughes comes to mind. Yeah.
Okay, so you you are a bit more informed than traditional educational approaches to the Roaring Twenties. So in the what is the curriculum called? The world content standards that were created from uh, Common Core back when they did the No Child Left Behind Act and all of that stuff. They
Okay.
didn't include the Harlem Renaissance in the Roaring Twenties. You know, it's as a high school content area, like the Roaring Twenties, like to your point, where the flappers were, prohibition and things like that, and then it goes into the Depression in the 1930s. But most people don't know anything about the Harlem Renaissance. Most people think Langston Hughes was somebody that wrote in the 1980s, 1990s in terms of, his timeline. Um, and I only bring that up because for everything we learn about mainstream US history from a white European, perspective, the counterpart to that is what were Black and brown people doing, right? Like we have this falsehood of, oh, well, they just came out of slavery, they couldn't have been doing much. Where in all reality, some of the first millionaires were Blacks in the late 1800s. And, there's this uproar recently in the last year, last 6 months or whatever, about Black Wall Street out in Oklahoma.
Right.
But there were 16, 17, 18, 20 other communities that were just as, rich and that were also thriving, right? Like you learn that, Seneca Village right there in
Yep. Central Park.
Central Park was, a Black community before it was burned down to the ground. You know what I mean? Like
And I didn't
learn,
know that I didn't know that specific incident until I saw like a clip on the Amber Ruffin show like last year. So some stuff I
right,
was able to know and like learn about, and then some stuff it's like, wait, what? Like I didn't
right.
know.
But I bring it up because it's like if you're learning about those things as a college student or a young adult, how much damage has already been done to your perception of who Black and brown people are if you are learning about that now, right? Like, because think about it. If your whole life you never learned that, I'm going to say the Black man was put in such a hard position, when you see the lack of success in a particular group of people, I don't know about you, but I would just say maybe they're lazy. Maybe they are dumb. As opposed to, oh my God, I didn't know they weren't even allowed to read or else they would get killed. Oh my God, I didn't know Bull Connor was actually a real person that went on the public service announcement and told white men that there's a new Black family in the neighborhood and that he better see flames next time he walks down the street, right? Like these things will blow your mind as a kid. And you mean to tell me that I could teach about Hitler, but I can't teach about what was happening in America, which was just as impactful to like the global point of view of like just first world, like it just blows my mind, right? It's like, who are we really, like, why are we keeping this information from the generations that are coming up? Because in my mind, what I've done has only helped kids realize that there needs to be more empathy and unity because of some of the atrocities that took place from the 17, 18, and early 1900s, and even with in Minneapolis, like it hasn't stopped yet, but at its height, at its peak, kids need to know about that stuff. Both, I don't care who you are, black, brown, purple, white. You need to know, because in order for us to really come together, we need to heal. Like we need to take this band-aid off, which is integration. Take that band-aid off and really get to the bottom of some of these issues, because until we do that, black kids are going to continue to hate each other. White people are still going to have misconceptions about their non-neighbors, because we don't live in the same neighborhoods
Right.
statistically.
Right.
White teachers are going to fear black kids as early as kindergarteners, which is why they get kicked out of class more than any other group of kids.
Right.
The suspension rate is always going to trickle down to being black and brown. So like there's never going to be a shift if all we do is sugarcoat and paint over the issues every year, sending kids on to the next grade without really digging deep and allowing kids to have those uncomfortable conversations, because the adults don't want to have them.
Right. And they don't find out. They're like, I was grateful to have parents that, constantly like educated me on my history, and like, make me watch certain movies, or like my dad would like put me onto certain books and documentaries. So I I was educated and on certain things, but a lot of things I didn't know based off of just where I went to school and how the curriculum was set up. So that's very true. And it's like by the time I know, it's already too, I'm okay, but like for the white people learning, it's like they're not learning till 21, but their minds are already made up about black people. And it could be
Yeah,
changed, but it's like it's kind of too late.
like there's this thing in where I work. It's called Constitution Day,
Okay.
right? Like the whole district, like 300,000 kids in the district, like it's huge. We celebrate Constitution Day as if it's some type of oh my God, as if it's some type of
It's July 4th or something, like big celebration.
well, even the 4th of July, and most recently people are starting to realize, you know what I mean? Like that,
Yeah.
what does that really mean for everybody? But anyway,
Yeah.
Constitution Day is a celebration of the US Constitution. And we teach the preamble, we the people. Um, and when you think about the context when it was written, it was 1780 something. But when you think about it, it's like we the people in order to form a more perfect union. So we're looking at that as a group of kids, right? I've got a couple black kids, a couple Asian American kids, majority white kids in the room. And I'm just like, who is the we that they're talking about? Because we know what their rights and responsibilities are. We know about citizenship. We know about, you know, we briefly learn about the three branches of government to balance out the, our republic and all of these things. But they're like, who is the we? Like they're not talking about white women. So y'all don't count in this. Slavery was not, abolished until, well, we could get into that. But slavery was not at least written down to be, obsolete until X. So they're not talking about you. People coming from other countries weren't integrated into the society the way that it is now, where you can have families coming over from, Portugal or whatever. So y'all
Right.
three are out. So who are they talking about? And then the kids were like, are they talking about rich white men who have ties to Great Britain, who have like the in, right? So it was like,
That's very selective.
but listen to this though. So it's deeper than that, even, because then you have teachers who are walking around with George Washington t-shirts and, red, white, and blue and all of this stuff. And they're looking at me like, why are you not celebrating this with us? Like they don't even get it. And it blew the minds of some people when I said that the first 8 presidents in this country were slave owners. Not just George Washington, with his 200 and something slaves. Not Adam, I'm talking about the first 8. And then after that, it was like it didn't get any better. You know what I mean? To the point where fast forward to the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, Kennedy was afraid to make any harsh statements to try to end segregation and slavery. Like, he was terrified.
Right.
And people paint Abraham Lincoln as a hero. People paint Kennedy as potentially one of the better, one of the more diplomatic presidents for the community. And like, it's scary because we really have never had these conversations with kids, let alone with each other as, staff members. Except the only time we talk about race heavy is when I'm in my Black schools. But we're talking about it from a reactive approach as opposed to proactive.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Like how we feel about it as opposed to
we need to change this. It ain't fair, it ain't this, it ain't that. But we don't have the power sometimes as people of color, like Black families and Black teachers. We don't have we don't have that influence sometimes. We don't have the power. Where the power is in legislation. The power is in, is in
voting.
Voting, which we do have, but we're not trained. We're trained to think that we can't change things, which is why no one goes to those local elections to make sure they put the right people in, in city hall or town hall. People complain about not having, lights up at the basketball court. Well, that's not the white man keeping you down. You didn't go and voice that concern
at the town hall in your town or city.
So but again, it all it's all connected to this larger component of education for sure.
No, I completely agree with what you said. And I was gonna ask you, as a Black teacher now teaching at a predominantly white school, has there been moments where like white students or maybe non-Black people of color have like kind of doubted what you're saying, and like you feel like, oh, it's because I'm Black, because they don't question this teacher or this teacher? Have you what I'm trying to say? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have felt like I get treated different by the kids, but only in the beginning of, like when I form relationships with them, with the children at least, that kind of goes away. It goes away kind of fast because, I mean, I wouldn't listen to, I mean, I don't care if you're white or Black. Like, I wouldn't really respect or listen to you unless I kind of understood that you were invested in me, So I think for non-children of color or for white students, they're just not used to someone that doesn't look like them investing in them. But traditionally, that's what teachers have to do. We have to believe that you can be the next whoever, right? The next Neil Armstrong, the next, right. You know what I mean? To where it's just uncommon. It's unfamiliar. It's like, imagine being in the hood, growing up your whole life, and then a white lady pops up and says, "Oh, I love you guys. You can be whatever you want." You'd be like,
what you talking about? Yeah.
Like, the only white person I know is the person that came and is trying to take my siblings away with the state. You know what I'm saying? Like,
or police. Yeah.
Right. So it just takes time, and it takes building relationships. And I think, and that trickles over even to peer relationships with adults, right? Like, they just, they'll give me a high five, but when they walk down the street with the lights a little dim, they're going to grab their purse in fear, right?
Yeah.
But it's just relationships, because if they were in a white neighborhood that they didn't know and they saw, some sketchy looking white dudes, they would still be a little bit afraid. It's relationships. Right. Now, it's a heightened fear when it's very unfamiliar. Like if it was like, me and one of my boys in the corner with a hoodie on, but at the end of the day, man, I pull that hoodie down when I get to work and they see me and they know that, that Black people are brilliant, loving people because of because what I bring to the table every day. Right.
And you defy all those stereotypes. So yeah, I like that thinking. How did COVID-19 and this ongoing pandemic affect you and your teaching?
I mean, it actually made me a better teacher, man, because you had to find ways to connect. You had to find ways to build relationships from, through the screen, Um, and fortunately, I was in a place in my career where I was really confident and I know what I'm doing. Um, enough at least not to have, worried about um learning any best practices for, what I do on a day to day. So it was more so just adjusting to um making sure the kids weren't bored, you know what I mean? Because
Right.
first week it was cool, it's fun. Everybody's like, oh, we're home. Second week, third week, kind of the same. But once you get into that fourth and fifth week of just, all right, turn on your screen. Okay. All right, everybody. We gotta touch. They was
Right.
like, they was like, yo, man, this is getting old.
Right. Like being on Zoom all day. Yeah. Yeah. It was rough. Like for me, because I like to speak and see people's faces and be in person while I'm learning. And can I go up on the board and write something? Like I'm used to, in person. So having to be on Zoom, or worse, having some classes where it's like the professor will just post on Blackboard, and I never get to meet with them. I just, they upload assignments and I do them. That was rough. Like asynchronous, I think they call it. So yeah, I think it's definitely had a big impact. And I'm glad that schools are opening up, and like we're able to have that in-person learning again, because it's crucial. Some people, they're able to adjust, but it's harder for other people. And I think sometimes we forget, like it's very difficult for the teachers and the educators, because you're not used to this way of learning. Unlike, like on school, online learning has been a thing, but if you're not that type of teacher, that was new to you. It was like a big adjustment for you as well.
Yeah.
So
And
that's why I was
the go-to for a lot of my colleagues was just like post some activities and tell the kids to do this. You know what I'm saying? And it wasn't really a lot of instruction happening.
Yeah. So unfortunately, school discipline and the criminal justice system are intertwined. According to a 2015 Vox article titled "The School-to-Prison Pipeline Explained" by Libby Nelson and Dara Lynn, the authors report that Black students are suspended or expelled 3 times more frequently than white students. And while Black children made up 16% of all enrolled children in 2011 to 2012, according to federal data, they accounted for 31% of all in-school arrests. Also, according to a 2018 article from The Atlantic titled "A Root Cause of the Teacher Diversity Problem" by Melinda D. Anderson, the author reports that nationally, federal data shows more than 8 out of 10 teachers are white, while fewer than 1 in 10 are Black. These statistics stand in sharp contrast to student demographics in US public schools, where 47% of children are white and 16% are Black. Given these statistics, how do you think we can solve the school to prison pipeline and increase the number of Black educators in schools?
Yeah, man. The school to prison pipeline is real, right? A lot of people don't even understand what that means, what the implications are, have been. Um, it starts for me, right? It starts with going back and taking a look at the communities. It takes taking a look at neighborhood by neighborhood, because when you're when you don't when you don't set a community up to be successful with the right amount of attention and resources, then you know what will actually end up happening, right? People start trying to fend for themselves. People get into survival mode. Take my own family, for example. My uncles and my mom, they scrapped for whatever they could get, right? They resorted to selling drugs, being violent, because they just didn't take advantage of the tools that were provided. But also, people, like I said, people gave up on them because they have educators who enter a broken system and aren't really invested in the kids. So the kids don't really feel like you really care, that you actually love them, and they just continue to have the same behaviors take place over and over. So we have to find a way to really, like, shake up how kids feel about school. Like, I hated school as a kid for so many reasons, right?
Wow.
For one,
Okay.
every time I walked into the building, somebody looked at me like I was crazy. Nobody understood me. Nobody looked like me. Nobody sounded like me. So that pushback is always going to be a part of my approach. And it's me protecting myself as a kid. So now you magnify that. You got 50 kids that act like me and feel like me in a building where there's only 200 of us, 300 of us.
Right.
So when you are an educator who doesn't understand the dynamics of what a child is going through in a particular community, when you see a kid throw his arms in the air, you're like, oh my God, like my nephew doesn't do that. Or, my niece, my niece that lives in a different community, she doesn't do that. So that he must be a problem. That must be a problem. I could just be doing this because I'm hungry and nobody asked me that I'm hungry. Or that my
Right.
mom smacked me in the face this morning because she's mad that, her life is going the way that it's going. And I'm just
Right.
mad and I don't got nobody to talk to. I don't got nobody to vent and no outlets. So again, like I caught myself feeding into the same system of assuming that this traumatic behavior that a kid is responding to has to be disciplined. You can't discipline trauma, right? Like you have to work through it. You have to have specialists come in and literally break down those barriers and those walls that kids are putting up in order to be able to communicate and have that kid actually, feel safe. And it all goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, man. It's like if you don't feel
Right.
safe, you're not really going to open up and participate in anything. So I mean, I worked this summer in DC and I had a bunch of kids that were just, they are their families are victims of gun violence and other traumatic, extreme traumas. And until they actually saw me come back every day at the same time over and over and over and over all summer, they finally trusted me just enough to participate in some of the activities. But to assume that you're going to walk into a building in the first week of school and tell kids that you don't know from nowhere to just sit down and be quiet. Excuse me?
How is that going to
Now,
solve anything? Yeah.
now, not only are you telling me to be quiet and sit down, but you don't know me, you don't look like me. I, I don't believe that you even care about me, right? So I'm not saying that the only way you can be successful is by being a Black person teaching Black kids, because being a Black male, having worked primarily with Black children, I remind the boys and some of the girls sometimes of the same Black male who broke their heart or who is breaking their mom's heart. So then there's a double-edged sword to it. But the solution that has always provided me with the best results, again, it has been that relationship building. Mean what you say and show up, because this is the
Right.
only way you're going to build trust with kids that have a hard time trusting into a system or engaging into a system or participating rather. Like you just have to stay the course. Like you can't start off and then as soon as you get pushed back, I got to kick him out, he got to go to the principal. Nah, figure out, okay, grab that young man or that young lady during lunch and figure it out. Like, and I've done both. I've said, get out of here, I can't deal with you because I don't know how. Not because I can't, because I don't know how. And that's really
Right.
another problem. um your toolbox has to be deep when you're working in schools where the the go-to is always send this kid down the hall. You know what I mean? You got to have a deep toolbox of approaches to working with kids.
No, yeah.
um but the school to prison pipeline is deep, man, and I'm not sure if it will be eradicated in our lifetime, but it's worth fighting for.
Right.
Because like we don't have a resource officer in my building. I don't have cameras. We don't have cameras in my school building.
Right.
Every single school in DC, public, charter, whatever, there's resource officers, security guards,
Wow.
cameras. That's already now it's necessary because it's a safety issue when you have children that have that behave a certain way or that exhibit certain behaviors. But it's also sending a signal like, we don't trust y'all.
Right.
I can't turn my back because you're gonna do something that might be dangerous or that I don't like. So we need to put some cameras in here to see y'all when I can't.
And that's a
Oh,
bad way to start.
man, it breaks my heart, man. It
Yeah.
breaks my heart when the first person you see in the morning is a security guard or a cop instead of a principal or a teacher that's saying welcome, you know?
Right,
So
exactly. You can't start off a school student, teacher student relationship like that. So I completely agree. Mr. Morning has to get going. But I appreciate you taking the time out to do this. I wanted to have this episode because I think, black educators matter, black teachers matter. We teach young kids need to see themselves represented by the people that are teaching them. And it's a shame that out of all the years of schooling that I've done, I've only had 3 black teachers. That's a shame, and some
I
people,
haven't I didn't have one K to 12.
I was about to say that some people have never had any, so
Yeah.
this conversation was important. And thank you again for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Mr.
Yeah,
Morning.
and
Mhm.
maybe in the future, man, if you have another opening, I could jump on and we could talk about literature and the book series that I created and all of that. I do have to get going, but again, like let's stay in touch and keep this conversation going. And maybe later on in the fall or early in the winter, I could jump back on and we could talk about some of the other pieces that we didn't dive too deep into, and then also, have a chance to talk about the Crunchy Life series.
No, yeah, I would love that. Oh yeah, that'd be dope. That'd be dope. So I'll stay in touch with you. Take care. Take
All
care.
right, my man. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon. All right.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. Peace.
Mr. Morning's book series, A Crunchy Life, is available now on Amazon. For more information on how to book Mr. Morning for literacy workshops, classroom lessons, or keynote speech, visit www.glenmourning.com. Be sure to leave a rating for the Cervantes Podcast on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on the Cervantes Podcast YouTube channel, and click the notification bell up top so you're notified whenever I upload a new episode. Thank you guys for listening. Have a good one.